Aubrey S. from Brownsville Games, and I'm going to talk about something that's pretty interesting in the game show TV landscape. And if you watch Buzzr, which is a pretty good game show, it's an over-the-air channel that I think that if you're a game show lover, you'll appreciate because I have a decent catalog of some good classic game show programming. And they're about to do a daytime and a weekend lineup change that's going to impact the rest of the summer, probably going into the fall. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what it is that's going to change with this upcoming schedule, which is about to take place in about a week or so from this recording, and whether or not it's a good move. So just to paint a picture, there are a ton of game shows that currently exist on the current schedule. And it's a laundry list. It's a laundry list of game shows that you'll possibly see. And I'm just going to put the list out there. But there are some notable game shows, right? There's Match Game PM, the 80s edition. Sale of the Century, my favorite game show, the 88 edition. Family Feud, the 82 edition. What's My Line from 1973. Super Password from 1985. The 90s edition of Supermarket Sweep. There's the Newlywed Game from the 90s. There's Talk About, which is a British game show. Not British. Oof, my mind is off. The Canadian game show hosted by Steve Cox. That's on the lineup. There's, if you don't know what it is, look it up. WHEW. But if you're a game show head like me, you will know what that game show is. Hosted by Tom Kennedy. That's a pretty good show, and that's usually on the air. There's Tattletales, Press Your Luck, the 60s edition of Password. There's Classic Concentration. There's Card Sharks, the Jim Perry and Bob Eubanks edition. Concentration with Jack Nars. Blockbusters with Bill Cullen. There's so many game shows that honestly, if you haven't seen the channel, you definitely should. And if you do watch it, you'll understand what I mean in terms of there's a lot of content that's being played on the channel on a daily basis. Now, does it mean that the change that they're going to make is it going to be a good thing? Because if you didn't know, there's somewhat of a reduction in terms of how much game shows are being played in terms of its variety, right? There's not a long list of game shows that I'm about to mention in their new lineup that is going to exist in this time block versus what's already being offered to us. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to talk about the new lineup. I'm going to list out what shows are going to be on at what time, and I want to walk through each of these game shows to say whether is it good to keep it on Buzzr going into the August time, or should we just, hey, it has its run, it's had its run, let's move on. So let's start with 8 o'clock. Mind you, this is the Monday through Friday schedule. 8 a.m. is going to be Talk About, and they're going to share that 1 hour block. 9 o'clock, there's Card Sharks, but there's two different types. There's the 79 edition with Jim Perry, my favorite game show host, and the 86 edition with Bob Eubanks. At 10 o'clock, there's back-to-back Tattletales. 11 o'clock, back-to-back Classic Concentration, the 90s edition from 1990. Noon, back-to-back Match Game. 1 o'clock, back-to-back Password. Are you noticing a trend here? There will be game shows that will be guaranteed a back-to-back double play for the block for that hour. So let's continue. 2 o'clock, you have back-to-back Password Plus from 79. 3 o'clock, back-to-back of the Newlywed Game. Now, here's where things get interesting. From 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock p.m., Classic Concentration, the 88 edition, is played. So there's 4 episodes of Classic Concentration. So if you really don't like this game show, you're probably not going to be paying attention to the 4 to 6 o'clock block. But anyway, then you have the 6 o'clock Let's Make a Deal, the 1984 edition. This is like the first season of the new Let's Make a Deal. So if you're really into Monty Hall, you're going to be in luck. In fact, from this recording right now, we've already had a marathon of the new Let's Make a Deal, and it's really fun to watch, especially if you're a fan of the current edition with Wayne Brady. it's interesting to see where we've came from to what we have now, and I'm really appreciative of both Wayne Brady and his edition of the program, along with the OG himself, Monty Hall. Now at 7 o'clock you have the 77 edition of Match Game. 8 o'clock, and again that was back to back at 7. 8 o'clock is back to back again at the Newlywed Game, and from 9 to 11, I kid you not, a double block of Super Password from 1985. And it ends at 11 p.m. with Match Game Hollywood Squares Hour. And of course, they'll loop the same game shows they already played going into the 6 a.m. slot, 7 a.m. slot when they do pay programming. So, I'm going to break down each of these game shows, and I'm going to tell you whether or not I'm really a fan of the change or whether or not I just don't really like it. And could there be replacements? Could there be other game shows that they could have added that they didn't think about placing in? So let's talk about, right? Do I like that game show? Should it stay on the lineup? I like it. First off, I like the game show host himself, Wayne Cox. Wayne Cox comes from a long line, a pretty stellar game show host coming out of Canada. And notably, he did Second Honeymoon, which was a very popular Canadian game show in the 80s. And Talk About was one of those really cool game shows that it's very simplistic in terms of its concept. You basically guess words associated with a subject. And, if you haven't seen it, I recommend that you watch it. But it's pretty fun. The only thing I don't like about it, and that's not the fault of the game or the format, the payouts are not as great as it should be. And, and when I say should be, I say that in relation to the United States, but it's us, the United States, that kind of set up other countries to look at these game shows and not pay out as much. And I say that because if you know about the quiz show scandal of the 1950s, when game shows started to basically become scams, it really discredited the format. And yeah, game shows existed going into the 60s and 70s and 80s. But other countries didn't follow suit in terms of how game shows were being done, especially when it came to payouts. And Canada is no exception, right? They've been doing game shows for ages. But their payouts have always been, well, not the same as the United States. So in this case, a game show like Talk About, you'll win hundreds of dollars, maybe a few grand, but I don't think there's ever been a contestant, well, actually a group of people because it's a team. I've never met a team of players that made more than $10,000, right? So that's something that, it's beyond the control of the game, but I think the flow and just the overall idea of the game is pretty good. And honestly, I wish that Talk About would have the back-to-back slot. I think it's worthy of a show being like that, having an hour slot. Whew. The next one. I love it. If you haven't watched this game show, it is so much fun, and it's definitely ahead of its time. First, in terms of its concept, I think that if you ever played the board game Battleship, it kind of has that vibe, right? Contestants set up a board where, one player is a blocker, the other player is a charger, and the charger has to charge through answering questions. The question usually has an answer that's obviously wrong, and it's usually like a gag, like a joke. And it's the contestant's job to give the correct answer from the gag. And, you earn points or money, actually, if you get the right answers. Players set up blocks where if they go into a certain amount of cash, because it's divided into different blocks, if you land on them, oh man, this is so exhausting. Just watch the show. It's a really, really, really good show. And part of the reason why I like it so much is because, like I'm saying, it's similar to a board game like Battleship, but it has a pretty cool trivia element. It was ahead of its time because it was not the type of game show you would have expected coming from the 1970s. It's very unique in terms of a lot of innovation and an interesting type of style of game shows that accommodated the Q&A style, but it was very animated. Even from like the introduction of the show itself was basically a cartoon. It was like I was watching Scooby-Doo or something. And so in itself, from the main game being interesting, the bonus round where you have to face a bunch of villains, you have to answer questions before the villain does, and you have to cross this long-ass ramp of villains. The theme music to the bonus round is pretty exciting. Which, by the way, some other cool trivia. The theme song and pretty much a lot of the soundtrack for the game show was done by TV legend Alan Thicke. That's right, the father of Robin Thicke, the same dude that you might have grown up with on Growing Pains. Yeah, he did the soundtrack to the game show. Who would have known? So yeah, that deserves a back-to-back block, but it doesn't. But we move on. Card Sharks. I have mixed feelings. The 79 edition I actually prefer because I really like the version that's done by Jim Perry. He's honestly one of the best game show hosts I have ever seen, and I think that he really makes watching the game show a lot of fun, especially from its 70s cheesy motif and style. The 86 version, it's all glitz and glamour, but I don't like Bob Eubanks as a game show host here. It felt pretty different. I don't know. I think the pace of the game, they had like different variations of the bonus round. They had like the Joker element where if you find Jokers, you can get a new car. I didn't even mention the Bill Rafferty version because I believe that's like 87 or 88, and that game just has tons of gimmicks. But I don't know. I'm more of a classic guy, but 86 wasn't all that bad. It also innovated those like questions where they had special guests in the audience and they had to play a miniature version of their normal style version of the game. I don't want to go deeper into it, but if you watch the 86 version of Card Sharks, you would know what I'm talking about. All right, next. Let's talk about the next game show, which is Tattletales. I'm not a huge fan of the game show. I really don't care much about it. I'm not saying that Bert Convy. I'm not saying that Bert Convy is not a great game show host. I think he looks pretty great in terms of his style and his interaction with the special guests that are all playing for an audience based off of them telling their secrets. Or not necessarily their secrets, but they pretty much open their personal lives to the audience, and the audience makes money off of it. It's kind of like the Newlywed Game. It's like those couples, they come on the show and they represent different colors that represents the section they're playing for. I don't know. I'm not that much of an entertained guy when it comes to this sort of style of game shows. It's kind of how I feel now about reality TV shows being treated as game shows, because there are reality game shows out there. But I'm not a huge fan of it. So if you ever want to know the origin stories of those style of game shows we see now, those reality game shows, it stemmed from game shows like Tattletales, which goes far, far back, like into the 70s. Now, let's move on. You got Classic Concentration, the 90s edition. I like the 90s edition. First off, the 90s edition had a different format from 88, where at that point you had the 2 wins and then you make it to the bonus game, versus the 88 edition, the earlier editions, where it's like, oh, you can just keep on winning as many times as you want to win a brand new car. And there have been people that have done it. But I think that the 90s version was pretty cool because they had like those special editions of Classic Concentration. They had they had like a Tournament of Champions at one point, or around the world type of gimmicks. They had like themed editions on the 90s edition. I'm just a fan of both, but the 90s edition, totally fine with it. The one thing I will say that, and you can kind of tell on Classic Concentration from time to time, is how tired Alex Trebek is. When Alex Trebek is like hosting the 90s edition, he seems really tired. And I wouldn't really blame him. If you were hosting 3 game shows at the same time, he was hosting Classic Concentration, he had to host, To Tell the Truth? Yeah, he was a To Tell the Truth host in the 90s. And he looked displaced. And of course, he was hosting Jeopardy! 3 game shows in the 90s. This guy was tired. But you know what? I still love him as a host. And I really like the concept of the game overall. And just winning cards is a lot of fun to watch. Alright, Match Game 74. Alright, do I think Match Game is a bad game show? Absolutely not. It is a perfect example of a fun ESP game show. I am a huge supporter of it. But here's where I have issues with it on this channel. They have played so many fucking versions, so many times of Match Game. I think Match Game is the most played game show on the channel. Honestly. There are so many variations that we watch, from the early Match Games, from the early series, to the, the Richard Dawson years, where he was really popular, like the 76s, the 77s, heck, maybe the 74s. And then we had the years where Dawson was gone, right? We're talking about 79, 80, that world. We see it all the damn time, this damn show. And again, Rayburn, really great host. He's up there, probably top 10 best game show hosts of all time. But I just don't want to see this guy all the time. So I feel like this was one game show that could have had a moment of a hiatus. Now, Password, 67 edition. Interesting. I think it's interesting that they're doing this for an hour. Do I like it? I like the classics. But I really, really, really wish that they would have had the 70s edition. Now, I know the 70s edition is not the most well-liked, but the format is very different. And I like how different it was in terms of the ABC edition. I'm talking about like the 73, the 74s, the 75, like when they had the Password All-Stars tournament. Man, I'm a fan of it. But, I don't mind it sticking on a 1 hour block. Password Plus. I don't really like Password Plus. I'm not saying it's bad. I just don't like Tom Kennedy hosting it. I think, felt out of place watching it. I mean, Alan Ludden is a legend, and he's been hosting so many variations of the Password game going into Password Plus. And even then, when it first came out, when he was begging people to watch the show, I loved it. And NBC was lucky that they were able to continue that series. Do I want to watch it in the hour block? I wish it would have been like one of those. I wish it was like the 8 a.m. block where you can just watch one episode and that's it for the week, for the day. All right, the Newlywed Game, the 90s edition. I'm not a fan of the Newlywed Game. It's just not my cup of tea. It reminds me of reality game shows, and I don't care about people that much. I care more about the game. And the game is bare basic, like, here's a question. What do you think your spouse would say? If you match it, you win points. Most person with the family with the most points wins. Boring. And also, the 90s edition just felt weird looking at Bob Eubanks trying to, understand modern marriages and relationships. I mean, of course he understands, but, boring. All right, next. We go back to Classic Concentration. This is the 88 edition. I assume this is the version where there wasn't the 2 wins, then you move to the bonus round. It's like if you solve one puzzle, you get to go to the bonus round immediately. I like that. I think it's a really good style. And this is the version where it gives a lot of money in prizes and, of course, cars. They gave away so many cars in the 88 seasons. 88, 89 seasons. But would I want to watch it for 4 hours? I don't know. I'm not too comfortable with it. But I understand. Give some more Alex Trebek love to him. All right, 6 o'clock. Let's Make a Deal. Mixed feelings. I love Let's Make a Deal. I love the 80s version, but I don't like the first season. I like the older seasons. Especially where they had the Door Number 4 edition. And they gave away bigger prizes during that point. They're not playing those episodes yet, maybe, but I haven't seen it yet, at least through their marathons. They're showing the first season. Even like some of the theme song music, it's kind of like the music soundtrack for the first season sounds kind of different. So, I don't know. I have mixed feelings, but I like the fact that I get to see Monty Hall again. 7 o'clock, Match Game. Boring. I already made my argument about this. The Newlywed Game, 8 o'clock. Boring. I already gave my argument about this. Super Password. Good game show. Shouldn't be 2 hours. It just should not. I mean, at this point, it's fun, but I'm not that much of a Bert Convy fan. It's a good game show, and it gave away a lot of money. A lot of money. It was the last version of Password that we got to know until we had the Regis Philbin edition of Password, and that came out on CBS in the 2000s, $1 Million Password, and that was like the last rendition of it. Speaking of which, word on the street is that Password, they're bringing it back on NBC very soon. It's going to be hosted by Keke Palmer, along with Jimmy Fallon, and I think it's going to look kind of fun, but I like the classics. But Super Password, not really my favorite. Match game Hollywood Squares Hour at 11. Why the hell is this game still slotted on Buzzr? Like, honestly, why this game show? This is the worst version of Match Game and the worst version of Hollywood Squares out there. And you know why I say they're terrible? Because everyone knows it, that this was the shittiest version of this game show. Like, you took two great iconic game shows and you merged them together like a Smucker's, peanut butter and jelly spread. What the fuck? Like, this is terrible. First off, Match Game is pretty much what the basis of the game show is. It's like it's Match Game, but they so happen to add Hollywood Squares into it for what reason we don't even know, right? So you got this game show, and by then, it's not the same Gene Rayburn that you knew in the 70s. He gotten older. Like, this guy's been hosting, Match Game since its original version in the 60s, right? So this game show's been on in the 60s. This has been done in the 70s. It was done in the early 80s. And now he's doing this version, the last version he would ever host. And he's doing it with the dude from Sha-Na-Na, John Bauman. And John Bauman hosted other cooler game shows down the road. Like, I know he did like this music game show. Oh my god, I forgot what it is. I'll probably put it out there. But the point is that he wasn't the best game show host for this Hollywood Squares Match Game bullshit. He seemed really uncomfortable. He was very, caught up on just like the pacing of the game, that he didn't make it exciting. He made it felt like he was doing a chore. He was way too serious half the time. And also, Gene Rayburn, while he was a contestant at this point, he was one of the most annoying people to deal with when it was time for John to host. And I say that because, when it's the Hollywood Squares segments, you don't get a lot of time, right? Because they still have to make time for the end game of Match Game, which is like the bonus round of the whole entire hour, right? And so you have this setup. There's not a lot of time. And so when contestants select Gene Rayburn as a contestant, Gene is the type of person that will spend a laborious amount of time talking about a fact that no one really cares, right? We just want the question answered so the game can just keep on going and flowing. And this guy just goes out of his way to make people bored. And you can see it in John's eyes when this happens. And honestly, this game show shouldn't have existed. This was a shitty way to try to complement two game shows that really just don't belong together. And you know what? This game show has been on Buzzr for a while now. We've had this at least for a year. I'm pretty certain we've had this show on Buzzr for at least a full year. Give it a hiatus. I'm not saying that it should never be shown again, but damn, this game show could be replaced. Speaking of replacements, here are some game shows that I'm pretty upset that they pulled away. And here are some game shows that I wish they could consider to add to their programming. First off, Sail the Century should not have been replaced. Honestly, Sail the Century is the best classic Q&A format game show they had on their entire lineup. They don't really have game shows that are really Q&A based, right? You give me the question, someone will answer, you get points, yada, 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 yada. This was a huge element to Sail the Century. along with the prizes aspect and the overall gimmick of the temptation of trying to buy the prize, which is a sure thing, versus trying to have the biggest lead to win it all, to win better, luxurious prizes at discounted costs. Like, I get it. It's a great game show, and Jim Perry is one of my favorite game show hosts because he hosted the hell out of this game show. Oh, and by the way, remember earlier I talked about Alex Trebek and how he had to do like 3 game shows? So did Jim Perry. Yeah, this guy had to do Sale of the Century, right when it first came out from 83 to 89. He also had to do Definitions, which is a Canadian game show that's kind of like Wheel of Fortune, but a low-budget edition of it. And it's been on for like decades, right? And he hosted that at the same time. And he also did another game show called Headline Hunters, also another Canadian game show. And that was during the time of what? Card Sharks. Now, I'm pretty certain that Headline Hunters was probably at a time when he wasn't hosting 3 game shows, but at the same token, he was still hosting at least one and maybe another. And Headline Hunters, along with Definitions, at least that makes 2 game shows that he did nearly simultaneously, if not simultaneously. He did 3 at one point, and Card Sharks was definitely one of them. And again, Sale of the Century, a classic, underrated game show. I don't want anyone to ever redo it because it was done in the early 2000s called Temptation, and I'm still fucking pissed about how terrible that game show is. But anyway, that shouldn't have been touched. They should have kept it in the lineup. Very disappointed. Alright, The Price is Right, the Bob Barker edition. Come on, guys. We can watch it on Pluto. You know, if they can show those episodes on Pluto, why can't we watch it on Buzzr? I wish there was a way that they can get those game shows there. Scrabble. I think Scrabble deserves to have some sort of visibility on Buzzr. It's an amazing game show hosted by Chuck Woolery. It was also owned by Reg Grundy, which is the same productions that hosted Sale of the Century. So if Sale of the Century can get on Buzzr, because it's a Grundy Productions, which eventually got owned by the company that's basically allowing this channel to happen. A lot of their IP is placed here on Buzzr. If they can have Sale of the Century on Buzzr, why not Scrabble? A classic NBC game show from the 1980s. I wish it would have been on that. Split Second. If you can put Let's Make a Deal up there, then you can definitely try to put Split Second up there too. Another amazing version. 80s game show from Canada. Press Your Luck. I don't know. It's a really good game show. I really think that they could have at least had a 1 episode a day type of visibility. But I'm not too sad that it's removed. But I still feel like it could have stayed. So those are the game shows that I think that should have stayed or should just be included. And I also gave you my analysis of each of these game shows and whether or not they deserve to continue to be a show on Buzzr. Buzzr. If you like the ideas that I'm sharing, if you have your opinions, please feel free to put it in the comments. You can also click subscribe so that way you can see all the game shows that I'm posting. I mentioned this a while back, but I'm still new to this YouTube creating stuff, but I really want to thank you all for supporting our channel. And I say our because this channel is just as important to you as it is to me. You're watching it and that brings happiness, and me creating content to you, that brings me some level of happiness. But I would really appreciate if you just click subscribe so that way I stay on your algorithm when you are looking at content. So when you want to go on YouTube and you want to watch something, I stay right into your front screen so that way you can watch my new content. But it's hard for that to happen if you're not clicking subscribe. So please take some time. It's very simple, very easy to do. You can also like my posts so that way you can continue seeing more up-to-date content. And thanks for listening and watching. Peace.